In 1971, a film directed by Don Siegel and starring Clint Eastwood and Geraldine Page was released to the big screen. That movie was The Beguiled. The script was based on a 1966 novel written by Thomas Cullinan that was titled A Painted Devil. This film actually marks the third of 5 collaborations between the director Siegel and Clint Eastwood. Now, don't get misled by some of the movie posters that you see of this film. You'll actually see Clint Eastwood holding a pistol, but this is not your standard shoot-'em-up action film of Clint Eastwood. He does hold a gun a few times in the film, but there's no big shootout where at the end he walks up to the guy and asks him to make his day, or if the guy actually feels lucky. This movie is a Southern Gothic thriller, and it's pretty much a really chilling film. It's almost done in a Hitchcock-type way. In the closing years of the American Civil War, a severely injured Union soldier finds himself in the care of an all-girl boarding school in the Louisiana swamps. While he's in their care, he begins to charm a lot of the girls so that he doesn't get turned over to the Confederate soldiers. But as the film moves along, it begins to show that not everything is as it seems. You see, the movie doesn't give the women the best portrayal in the world. They live in a very secluded area, and they have a very sheltered life. Almost every one of the girls gets somewhat charmed by this stranger that's in their midst. Most of the girls have a feeling that they want to be with the young, handsome soldier, but there's some resistance that they have in one way or another. You see, throughout the film, we get these hints of certain demons in their past that may have traumatized them and make them draw closer to losing their sanity. Clint Eastwood was given a copy of the 1966 novel by producer Jennings Lang, and he couldn't put it down. He read it all through the night. In this film, Eastwood would know that the storyline allows him to be around nubile females that adore him, quite a few of these being minors. Clint Eastwood considered this film opportunity the type he needed, one that he could really show his true emotions, one that he wasn't swinging guns and lighting cannons with cigars. They brought in Albert Maltz to write the first draft of the screenplay, but some disagreements occurred, and they ended up bringing in somebody else to finish the script in an uncredited role. You see, the original script that Maltz had written ended up with the movie ending in a happy way, one that where Eastwood's character and the girl live happily ever after. Both Clint Eastwood and the director Don Siegel felt that an ending faithful to that of the book would be a stronger anti-war statement that they wanted to really show. They wanted to have Eastwood's character be killed. According to Siegel, this movie was supposed to deal with sex, violence, vengeance, and the central theme of the show is the impact of a man having relationships with multiple women and the trouble that arises from that. Now, there were a couple of people that were considered for the role of the domineering Miss Martha Farnsworth, but the role eventually went to Geraldine Page, who plays it magnificently. And then actress Elizabeth Hartman was the secondary co-star, and she likewise is a standout in the film. Rounding out the cast is Joanne Harris, Darlene Carr, Pamela Ferdinand, and Melody Thomas. Universal initially wanted Siegel to film the show entirely in studio at Disney Studio Ranch, but he didn't want to do that. He preferred to film it at a real antebellum estate near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in Ascension Parish. That estate was called Ashland Belle Helene Plantation, and that was a historic house that was built in 1841. A great portion of the interior shots were filmed at Universal. Filming actually started in April of 1970 and lasted for 10 weeks. Now, Clint Eastwood had signed a real long contract with Universal, but after the release of this movie, which he felt that they just botched their release, they didn't promote it in the way that it should have been promoted. They led the audience to believe that the film was actually a standard Clint Eastwood film, which it wasn't. Eastwood got so irritated about it that he left the studio in 1975 and never looked back. And he never worked with Universal again until 2008 when he did Changeling. Now, I think it's super interesting to look at what Clint Eastwood said about his role in Beguiled. He makes the statement that Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino play losers very well. But my audience likes to live vicariously through me as a winner. That isn't always popular with critics. My characters have sensitivity and vulnerabilities, but they're still winners. I don't pretend to understand losers. When I read a script about a loser, I think of people in life who are losers, and they seem to want it that way. It's a compulsive philosophy with them. Winners tell themselves, I'm as bright as the next person. I can do it. Nothing can stop me. Now, this is another movie where Clint Eastwood has an affair. Almost every movie that I look at, Clint Eastwood has an affair with one of the actresses that's on it. He had a long-time love affair with Joanne Harris. It started in the movie and continued on afterwards. Now, it's said that the scene where they amputate the leg of Clint Eastwood, the artificial limb that they use when they're doing that scene, is actually the same artificial limb that they use on the $6 Million Man in the opening credits. The producer and director, Don Siegel, says that this is one of his favorite movies. And this is the movie where Clint Eastwood actually begins directing movies. He does a behind-the-scenes look at the producer and the director, Don Siegel, in a work called The Beguiled, the Storyteller. And as you know, Clint Eastwood goes on to be one of the most prolific directors in Hollywood. But this is where he got his start. Now, there's a real sad commentary to this. The two female actors that have the most screen time are Elizabeth Hartman and Geraldine Page. And they actually died 3 days apart from each other in 1987. Elizabeth Hartman had struggled her whole life with depression, and she actually took her own life by jumping out the 5th floor window of her apartment in June of 1987. And her co-star, Geraldine Page, died of a heart attack 3 days later that same year. These girls are monumental in their performances in this movie. Both of them are just experts at their craft. Now, they had a rule on the set of this movie for the girls. The director told them absolutely no makeup for the actresses on the set. But it's said that some of them actually snuck makeup in, which in turn made the director Siegel extremely angry. He wanted these girls to show a homeliness, an isolation, but yet they still had these carnal desires. Now, at the beginning of the movie, when the little girl is strolling through the woods and she comes upon Clint Eastwood, that role is played by Pamela Verdin. And she was only 11 years old during the filming. In 1995, she talks about during an interview that Clint Eastwood kissing her as the troops go by to keep her from screaming was an absolute total surprise to her. She wasn't expecting it because it wasn't in the script. And this is pretty obvious in the film. If you look at her expression, you can tell that she didn't know what to do. Clint Eastwood was actually supposed to just cover up her mouth, but he was told by the director to kiss her to make it more provocative. And it does. They used the very first take because her expression was so stunned and real and was just perfect. Now, Melody Scott Thomas writes in her book, about an event that happened when they're actually burying the character of Clint Eastwood after they've killed him by feeding him the poison mushrooms. Melody plays the character Abigail, and she is busy sewing up the shroud that covers Clint Eastwood before they bury him. So in her hand, she had an extremely long, thick, authentic-looking Civil War sewing needle. She was positioned near his feet, and for some reason she just felt the urge to stick old Clint Eastwood in the foot with the needle. She did it, and he screamed and jumped out of the hole that he was laying in. Melody was just 15 at the time, and she didn't fess up to anybody that she had done it, including Clint. He thought he had been bit by some kind of insect. She stated that she can't explain what was going on in her mind when she did that, but she just couldn't resist it. She said she didn't do it out of meanness because Clint was the sweetest guy in the world to the kids that were in the movie. They all just adored him. I think at some awards ceremony, she finally saw Clint Eastwood years and years later and told him what actually happened that day on the set. Make no mistakes, no one is safe in this movie. The director doesn't pull any punches. That's why this film is so effective from my standpoint. You add in some great and chilling performances from the cast, especially those of Geraldine Page and Elizabeth Hartman, combined with the creepy Southern Gothic atmosphere and a well-written script. You got a top-notch film in my book. Take a look at this different Clint Eastwood type film. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.